What's up, everyone? So today we're talking about what Signal just rolled out, which was their new secure backup feature, and everyone's kind of celebrating it like they've revolutionized privacy protection or something. And they're actually rolling it out as like a opt-in feature, basically. And it's an encrypted backup archive. And the free tier basically gets you all your texts plus the last 45 days of media. With the paid tier, that's like $1.99 or something per month. That gets you the full text, plus older media up to like 100 gigabytes. And the first phase is Android beta only. And they're building a kind of centralized repository of user communications. Mull that over for a moment. Like, think about that solitary statement. Like, does that actually sound like a good idea to you? Now, before I go on, like a tangent, because that's bound to happen here, I love and I use Signal, and I have for years. When I say years, that's what I mean. I'm not some Signal hater. I also think that Moxie Marlinspike is kind of a total badass, and if you know much about him, then you know he in fact very much is. When he published his paper that basically demonstrated SSL strip back, I don't know, I think it was in 2009, probably wrong, but whatever. I was really amazed by that. I totally did not capture tons of unencrypted usernames and passwords with it back in the day. That's not a thing that actually happened. Now, I have another YouTube channel called All Hacking Cons, which is not monetized and it never will be. It's just a kind of a pet project that I set up to try to bring education around cybersecurity and information security by putting out other people's talks that are way more intelligent than me. He definitely qualifies. But basically, it's an archive of something like 20,000 plus videos currently. And in it, you'll find his talks. They exist there. This backup system kind of stores your conversations on Signal servers. And they say it's protected by like the 64 character recovery key that gets generated locally and stays locally, according to them. Signal says that it never actually receives this key and that they can't recover it if it gets lost. And Signal claims that the stored backups aren't directly linked to your actual Signal account or your payment records. And they use zero knowledge, addressing similar to what they have in, with Signal Group's metadata protections, basically. This brings the question, can you back up locally? And the answer to that is no, you cannot back up locally. But don't worry, they swear they can't actually access your data without this key. So that brings up another question. Should we actually just blindly trust them with this information? And I think this backup feature, all in all, is pretty much the point, which I'm going to push back on in regards to a few things here. And first, let's start with the absolute most basic, kind of rudimentary thing that we can, and that's, who actually made the announcement and pushed for this, or made the announcement. I can't really say that he pushed for it because I don't have access to their internal communications. They claimed it was users who pushed for this, which I have no doubt people said, hey, I want to be able to back up my data. That makes sense. Probably those people were assuming that it would be locally implemented first. Anyways, side issue. If we go back to the basics are who made the announcement post? And it came from Jim O'Leary. You know Jim, right? Right? Well, Jim. Comment below if you know Jim or if you don't know Jim. Now, I personally did not know Jim. I was not aware of Jim. And this led me to my next question, which is, who the hell is Jim? And that led me to look into who Jim was. And Jim is Signal's vice president of engineering. And it's not a new position. He's been there since 2009. But then I started looking into it, and here's what kind of makes his background particularly interesting when we are specifically talking about him in the context of this specific post that he actually made. So Jim spent 4 years at Twitter from 2011 to 2015. If you know much about that time, that might be concerning to you. What did Jim do? Well, he was building account anomaly detection systems, which is essentially behavioral surveillance to track and flag, quote unquote, unusual user activity. Seeing that, though, kind of as a, hey, that's kind of weird, when I was doing OSINT, I kept going, right? Because I'm like, oh, maybe that's just like, one off. After Twitter, he didn't go directly to Signal, right? Instead, he kind of meandered around. After his time at Twitter, he went straight to Facebook from 2015 to 2019. What did he do there? Well, he managed security teams of up to 30 people with a multi-million-dollar budget during Facebook's worst privacy scandals. At Facebook, Jim coordinated something called Privacy IMOX. And I have absolutely zero clue if that's how it's pronounced or if it's supposed to be pronounced something like IMOCs, but I'm really not sure. I'm pretty much committed to IMOX at this point, so that's the term that I'm going to go with. That term, however, like however you want to say it, is something that stands for Privacy Incident Response Teams. Now, consider the nature and position and think back about, what was actually going on at or around that time on Facebook. Do you know? Like this guy, according to that time frame, and I want to phrase it like that for different legal reasons, this was the guy that was literally managing Facebook's damage control teams during things like, according to the time frame, the whole Cambridge Analytica scandal. And this is, during like congressional hearings about privacy violations and during the VPN spying operation that Apple basically banned from their store. Every major Facebook privacy breach from 15 to 19, then it would be logical to assume actually went through, Jim's incident response teams, especially because that was their focus, was privacy, right? So in case you didn't actually catch that, term teams was absolutely plural. So let's kind of walk through this and I'll try to paint you a more fuller picture here. Jim wasn't just like some random, low-level or high-level engineer. Like this guy legitimately controlled multi-million-dollar surveillance budgets at Facebook. His job included something called M&A security, which stands for mergers and acquisitions, which means when Facebook wanted to buy WhatsApp or Instagram to eliminate competition, Jim would evaluate how to basically absorb these companies and their user data into Facebook's kind of panopticon of Facebook surveillance that is basically a massive machine that, continually generates revenue off the backs of its users. When Facebook ended up buying WhatsApp for like $19 billion in 2014 and spending years integrating it, he was most likely the one that was there making sure that Facebook could properly surveil those 2 billion new users. And when they acquired Instagram to control things like photo sharing, it was the same thing. His job was literally helping Facebook eliminate any kind of alternatives by absorbing them. Who actually cares about that? Well, like I said, it gets worse. Given the time frame, he also most likely managed the security during Facebook's Onavo privacy scandal, which related to a VPN, Onavo VPN, which Facebook basically marketed as protecting users while secretly using it to spy on what apps teenagers were using, tracking competitors like Snapchat and TikTok at the same time. And when Apple ended up kicking the VPN off the App Store in 2018 for violating privacy rules, guess who's managing Facebook's privacy and security and compliance teams? Jim was, according to the timeline. He literally oversaw a fake privacy tool that was actually a surveillance weapon. Now, let's think hard about this, right? Does any of that actually sound familiar to you, right? A privacy tool that's actually surveillance. It's an interesting question because there's been quite a few of them. But now we see he's building Signal's secure backups. And again, this is a guy who spent 8 years in total between Twitter and Facebook, the two companies that perfected behavioral surveillance, arguably, and data monetization before becoming Signal's VP of engineering in October of 2019. The timing is just absolutely incredible. He left Facebook right after Zuckerberg's whole privacy-focused vision. Remember that whole, deal that he had where he had this, complete 180, and it wasn't really a 180, but you know what I'm talking about. It was this big announcement that was back in March of 2019, which just kind of, kicked off this kind of insult to injury thing. And it was right after the FTC had a record $5 billion fine, right when Facebook was under the maximum amount of privacy scrutiny. Basically, he went from building Twitter's anomaly detection systems to managing Facebook's privacy incident cover-ups and surveillance acquisitions to running Signal's engineering. And, the revolving door between surveillance, capitalism, and privacy organizations really couldn't be any more obvious to anyone paying attention. So, that's kind of it. It's crazy how there are such crazy parallels to actually uncover out there. Also, when I said that's it, I wasn't talking about Jim. It still gets worse. He also worked at Microsoft's Health Solutions Group, where he was the first security engineer for Health Vault, where, according to them, they were architecting from scratch how to centralize and store your medical records. And he built security for medical devices, basically the code that runs in devices, monitoring your heartbeat, your blood sugar, your most intimate health data is what he worked on. And he also found vulnerabilities in these systems after leaving Microsoft in 2011 and 2015. Meaning he either, had backdoor knowledge or the systems were so broken that external reviews basically revealed flaws. Now, dude had monitoring users kind of down to a heartbeat, right? So look at the pattern that's across his entire career. At Microsoft, from 04 to 11, he basically built centralized health surveillance during the push for electronic medical records, right? And at Twitter, from 2011 to 2015, he built behavioral anomaly detection during the Arab Spring when governments were, clamoring and just desperate to track protesters. And thanks to the Twitter files, we know a lot about that. But at Facebook, from 2015 to 2019, he managed privacy violations during the Cambridge Analytica, GDPR, and congressional investigations. Now, every single position involved centralizing sensitive data during periods of maximum surveillance expansion. Jim launched Twitter's bug bounty program, which sounds really good, right? Until you actually realize that a lot of times these programs serve to actually privatize vulnerability discovery and kind of keeps exploits quiet through financial incentives, which a lot of the time makes it so they could just spend money and they don't actually have to fix stuff. So they kind of see it as going away, versus kind of the immediate public disclosure that I'm more of a fan of, which is like, yeah, we know, like, anyone who, was on breach forums, probably can be like, yeah, that makes sense. But at Facebook, he ran their bug bounty, like with a multi-million-dollar budget and, again, this huge team of people. And it's kind of the same playbook with this guy, just different surveillance companies, right? He rewrote Twitter's production login systems that in turn was used to track every authentication event, specifically for behavioral analysis. He managed Facebook's AVVR security for like their metaverse surveillance ambitions, which I'm sure were super creepy, like mapping out houses and stuff. But now he's implementing Signal's backup authentication system using the same type of architectural principle, which is from, what we see, centralized management, right? Like if you notice in the actual blog post, there's no real concrete technical details. There's pretty much just, a bunch of trust us, bro, kind of nonsense BS that links to, in part, their groups. That's pretty much it. For a guy that's been entrenched in the anti-privacy scene, by and large, that's kind of what he's a crusader of, and so wrapped up in tech companies, he sure wasn't very technical or descriptive for a VP of engineering. And again, like real quick, just before I move on, like I just want to reiterate, like I do use Signal, like, and that's why I'm making this video, is because that's why it's an issue. We, as the users, should absolutely voice our opinions on what we believe is a problem or could be a problem or is an issue. And not only do I use it, but like I like it. I actively like it. It's something that like I do suggest, especially to, the normies that are out there, because it's better than just plain text messaging, obviously. And it's clean. It's got a nice UI. It's got great UX. Like you can just open it up and you're fine with it. There's no real hard configuration or anything, right? It's not XAMPP, right? Or like, something that's going to require multiple steps in parallel. And I think discussions and information like this should be things that we're having, and it should be things that are readily available to the public. These are the kind of discussions that I think we should be having in regards to software companies, whether they're, FOSS or whatever. Like, it's not just the code that, we're running, but it's also the people that like are literally overseeing the code, that also matter, in my opinion, in the equation that we look at when we look at these kind of things. Like, and Signal is, not without its own issues, though. And that's, something that we should also touch on, right? Like, so for example, their desktop database encryption key, right, stored in plaintext since 2018, only fixing it later on in July of 2024 after there's a ton of public scrutiny. And I remember when this was happening, people were like, oh, you're going to make a video on it? I didn't, because I had a ton of stuff going on. But, basically Signal had stored your encryption keys in plain text on desktop systems, which was a vulnerability that security researchers had been kind of screaming about for like 6 years or something. Like any malware with any kind of like basic file access permissions could absolutely grab these keys and decrypt your entire message history really without breaking a sweat. And when confronted about this very issue, the kind of gaping security hole that existed, Signal support just kind of said that the database key was never intended to be secret. And that was a big issue for me, because the company that kind of markets itself as the gold standard of secure messaging, admits their encryption keys were never meant to be secure. It's kind of an issue, and it's kind of an oxymoron that I really did not like. Also, aside from all that, you should use Simple X. Like, I just want to inject that, go Google it, look it up, start page it, whatever, check it out. But the vulnerability sat there for 6 years while Signal collected donations from privacy-conscious users who believed their messages were in fact protected. And this is exactly the kind of thing that blind trust ends up creating, which is why I'm always harping about don't trust, verify. If you get one thing out of this channel, get that from it, Don't trust anyone, including me. Don't trust me either. Like, go look this stuff up and prove me wrong. I love to be proven wrong because at the end of the day, I learned something when that happens. So I have no issue with it. Anyways, Signal did end up actually shipping the fix immediately following a, we'll call it like a high profile flare up on X that, basically revived the whole issue and set it on fire with propane. And it took kind of a billionaire to actually do so in order to get them off their asses to do something about this. And Signal's president, Meredith Whittaker, basically tried to gaslight everyone by claiming that if an attacker has device access, that no app can protect your data. And I found it really kind of condescending and like retarded. Like, it's kind of no different than claiming that viruses are bad or that the sun is bright or that snow is white. Like saying a random fact does not prove a separate point. Like, intentionally allowing a severe issue like this to go on for half a decade. And you've known about it this whole time, and then citing some dumbass hypothetical access to a hypothetical computer that a hypothetical attacker hypothetically has, is just not a reasonable counter to a real problem that actually exists for millions of people on software that your company makes, right? And all the while, the VP of engineering, who should have fixed this years ago, was busy implementing new features to centralize data into a subscription model instead of securing existing real-world security issues, which I personally would rather see them do. I would rather see you make your software secure than give us centralized backups by, Mr. Social Media. And this, it goes beyond that too, because like we have like commercial forensics that can absolutely decrypt and parse Signal databases from, seized or unlocked devices by basically extracting keys from the iOS keychain and then opening the Signal SQLite store. And that's, also trying to true for other messengers, but basically that's post endpoint compromise, not a break of end-to-end encryption, which is completely different. But it shows how easily Signal's data becomes accessible once a device is in law enforcement hands, which another side issue is why you should use Graphene OS. Look it up. And I should do a whole video on that too. Basically, anyone who says that they dislike it, I would do an OSINT investigation on them because they're probably a Fed. Anyways, that's a side issue. Academic work has basically shown that, full database media and log decryption on like devices that have been seized, any type of, phone really, except for from what I've seen, a lot of the Graphene OS devices, that's why I mentioned them earlier, is possible via reverse engineering the app's actual crypto workflow. For example, Celebrate announced that they, cracked Signal. They weren't actually breaking which is a very important distinction. Instead, they were kind of just simply copying the unprotected database files that Signal leaves accessible. That's it. So it really wasn't like some amazing thing. But researchers from Korea also demonstrated that they could actually decrypt Signal's entire database, which was like multimedia files, logs, and preferences by analyzing the app's decryption algorithm. And they didn't need, quantum computers or NSA supercomputers. They just did really basic reverse engineering, and they used those kind of skills to access information that was on like these seized devices. And the same technique that worked on local Signal databases will work on things like, backup archives once the key is actually compromised. And I'd bet money that Jim's fully aware of all that. As the VP of engineering, obviously he knows from his Twitter days, once you have the keys, the kingdom's pretty much yours. So Signal publishes transparency reports showing how they only hand over account creation dates and the last connection times to law enforcement. It's like a W that those are the things that they actually hand over. And Signal's subpoena pages basically show repeated instances where only account creation times and last connections were actually produced. And they kind of parade these reports as proof of their commitment to privacy while kind of conveniently ignoring that, physical device seizures bypass this entire security model. And the ACLU, credit to them, I usually don't like them a lot, but, helps them fight a lot of these subpoenas, while forensics companies kind of sell one-click extraction tools to all these different police departments with any kind of budget, which they've gotten and have due to years of property seizures, and if not that, capitulating to feds for money, right? And that's kind of just how it is. Now, Signal is adding backups to this entire equation. Your entire message history kind of depends on this one key, the 64-bit key that I mentioned earlier, that you store somewhere. And Signal suggests writing it down in a notebook or saving it in a password manager. Both obviously create permanent records that are subject to things like warrant subpoenas, or if the recovery key is exposed via something along the lines of phishing or shoulder surfing, which would be like really an incredible feat to see it as if it was shoulder surfing. See someone memorize that. But I mean, my question is like, is it possible? And the answer is yeah. Like we have to assume it is. Or a compromise of like whatever you want to say, right? Like however you store it, right? The attacker who also obtains the backup blobs can also in turn decrypt that archive. And this is exactly the kind of system that someone from Twitter's surveillance team would design. It's centralized, right? It's key dependent, and it's kind of ripe for exploitation because it has few things that have to actually be met in order to meet that burden. So I think this is like putting aside the fact that like you can't even export the backup locally. That's my real beef here. Like this, of course, would have been like literally the easiest feature to actually roll out because all the data is already on the device. And instead they created these stupid paid tiers, which, as they already know, creates a whole nother vulnerability. That's a whole separate attack surface. Like payments absolutely create external financial records through card processors and receipts. And like anyone with a brain knows that much. A company that kind of prides itself on privacy should probably prioritize things like the most private coin on the planet. Like they say on their front page, privacy isn't an optional mode. Monero agrees with that. A lot of other cryptocurrencies that claim to be privacy coins are like, opt-in privacy, which is BS. It's not real privacy. All the payments that they have are highly trackable, traceable, and very easy for even like the most novice of law enforcement to actually be able to obtain. And before someone like, argues, oh, they accept crypto, man. You should go look at the type of payments that they actually accept. And you'll notice like the one cryptocurrency that kind of should be there, Monero, the world's, top privacy coin, is absolutely nowhere to be seen. But don't worry, like you can send Bitcoin, which is more traceable than cash, or you could use PayPal, or you could use your bank directly. Isn't that great? Like somehow all of these, super highly traceable models all of a sudden aren't trackable? Why? Because they say so? And like this goes back to my whole point of like don't trust, verify. And like, signal backups aren't directly linked to the payer's account in their storage model, supposedly, so they say, but third-party financial logs do remain subpoenaable, right? Like credit card transactions, bank records, and payment processors, they all log data and they all become avenues for things like identifying if someone's a Signal user or not, and if they pay for backups. And, they kind of act like correlation just doesn't exist at all. This is absolutely a financial trail that exists completely outside of Signal's control, its encryption, and it's subject to subpoenas and court orders. And things like Jim's experience with Twitter payment systems surely taught him how these financial breadcrumbs actually work. So this begs the million-dollar question of, why have someone like him in charge of something while Signal claims kind of like this minimal data retention? Court documents show that they do store phone numbers, account creation dates, and connection timestamps. Again, all can be used, very easily in correlation attacks. And I get like, it's like, oh, it's minimal, it's not none. There's a difference, Sam. Yeah, I agree with that. But Signal stores phone numbers, right, for registration, but says usernames aren't stored in plain text. Now, if law enforcement supplies the, exact and current username, Signal can associate it to the account then. The phone number requirement for registration still remains, right? Add backup metadata to all of this, and you're creating more data points for things like correlation, which is exactly the kind of behavioral patterns that our friend Jim would have probably specialized in Twitter. And that's the issue here. So, cross-platform restore is another thing that they're talking about, and it's planned for the future, they say. How wonderful is that? Like, this will require encryption to work identically across a bunch of different operating systems with different security models. And, that's the kind of lowest common denominator approach, which means any vulnerability in one platform could basically compromise all the platforms. And that's not like abnormal. Like we've already seen this on their desktop vulnerability when that happened. The same plaintext key storage affected both Windows and Mac versions at the same time. Security researchers then also discovered that Signal's database encryption on things like mobile devices can be bypassed using keychain extraction tools like those from Belkasoft. Now, these tools exploit iOS security features to extract Signal's encryption keys directly from the device's keychain, then automatically decrypt the entire database. All you're doing in that case is basically leveraging the same API that Signal uses to access its own data. It's kind of like the picture of the snake eating its own tail. Like the backup system uses similar key storage mechanisms, meaning this extraction technique basically poses the same threat to backup keys when served with proper legal process. So Signal complies immediately and hands over whatever data that they have. And they frame this as this kind of minimal disclosure, but they're admitting they roll over for any court order, without any kind of meaningful resistance, which is exactly what I would expect from a company. right? Even privacy focused companies, they don't care. Which again is like another reason why I like kind of decentralized platforms a little bit more, because they don't have that. That's a little bit different, and they're storing encrypted backups that basically are kind of one compromised key away from full disclosure. So even if you don't even need to seize the device anymore to be able to get all the information from it, and it backs up daily. So, I mean, like, they've created a system where they can basically claim technical inability to decrypt while knowing that parallel construction through device seizures or key compromise achieves the exact same result. And for those of you that don't know, basically, parallel construction is when law enforcement illegally obtains evidence, then creates a fake investigation trail to hide the real source. And they pretend they basically discovered the evidence legally when they actually got it through illegal surveillance or illegal hacking or whatever. They would obviously define it a little bit differently than I would, but who cares what they fucking define it as, because they're legally allowed to lie to you in the first place, and it's one of the few groups of people that, literally use anything you say, against you. So, like, anyways, I'm not going to get sidetracked. I'm not going to get sidetracked. All right. Now back to Signal, right? We're going to stay on that track. The view once items, right? Message scheduled to disappear within 24 hours are supposedly excluded from backups. Okay. So the daily refresh removes items that are deleted in the last 24 hours. Now, that assumes that Signal actually deletes the old backup. How do we know they do? Like, if you're like, oh, Signal's open source. Yeah, the client that you have is. So that's like kind of the issue. And I might be missing something. Again, like, if I'm missing something or I'm wrong about something, like, let me know in the comments. I'm all up for learning. That's just how I see it from my limited point of view. Anyways, things like the longer timer disappearing messages, can persist in backups until they're, within that 24-hour window. Messages you thought were deleted get preserved in yesterday's backup, basically waiting for key compromise or a legal process to resurrect them. The disappearing messages feature becomes kind of partially meaningless when backups preserve the content that you intended to delete. And, we could ask former Treasury official Natalie Edwards about that, who learned about metadata dangers kind of the hard way when WhatsApp metadata actually led to her arrest and conviction for leaking documents to journalists. She believed that encrypted messaging protected her communications, but metadata correlation revealed the source of her relationships. And Signal's, backup system creates similar metadata. And that's really the problem here. The backup creation times, restoration events, key regeneration patterns, all kind of perfectly preserved for later or future analysis. And Jim's, anomaly detection expertise from Twitter, he knows exactly how powerful these patterns actually are for things like identification. And kind of the fundamental problem at the end of the day is architectural. Signal knows their desktop encryption was broken, for 6 years. And they know that, forensics tools extract their data daily from things like seized devices. They know that physical access defects exist inside of their security model. Yet they're pushing stupid crap like centralized backups, almost like acting like they've solved these issues with privacy, which is asinine at best, and worst, it's insulting to the people that are actually pandering this crap to. And this is especially true when you consider the fact that they don't give any kind of local option off rip. Like, that should have been the first thing that was pushed, not the last. Every backup key that's written down, again, becomes this physical vulnerability. The real issue here is that, a centralized backup model shifts the entire threat model from transport security to key management and endpoint security. The surveillance risk now depends entirely on users perfectly managing, their cryptographic keys, which is something that, most people are absolutely terrible at doing, and darknet market admins included. Like, you look up the Alpha Bay admin with his plain text passwords. That's just crazy. Even people with these crazy eye threat models, right? So Signal has basically essentially created this system where users pay monthly fees to maintain kind of their own evidence archives while believing they're protecting their privacy. And with former Twitter surveillance architects, running engineering, this design choice seems less like incompetence and accidental overlook and kind of more like internal architecture that purposely designed to centralize things for the sake of profiting off of user data. Who else does that? Anyways, also, I note real quick for the record, I literally only looked into one employee, okay? Like, one guy that works there, and the only reason I even looked into him because he's the dude who made the post. I can't even imagine the horror show that would exist if I investigated every single person who works at Signal, just based off this nightmare. So if you really must use backups, treat the recovery key like a hardware wallet seed, right? Especially the fact that they're going to expand this and you can put it on other, it's like that means the feds can install Signal Desktop, grab your backup if your key's compromised, and have all your chats, and it's going to export daily. That's an issue, right? So, just, never screenshot, that key, never, paste it into some cloud synced notes, and, never assume that a device's seizure, equals like, oh, it's going to be safe because it's encrypted. That's just not, it's going to, don't trust anything, basically, But yeah, you can also recognize that there's real operational security issues, and recognize that real operational security means actually controlling and owning your own data, right? Like managing those keys locally. Signal, make it so that we can back up locally, man. Like, what the hell is wrong with you people? For those of you watching, don't trust third parties, question everything, with anything, especially with stuff that like you can't afford to actually lose. And know that like even something that you think is innocuous information can absolutely be something that you can't actually afford to lose. And you might figure out that's true when it's too late and it's actually weaponized against you by the state, right? All of this is even more true when those third parties are basically run by people who built their careers creating surveillance systems at scale for massive multi-billion-dollar companies that literally make a living off of pimping you out and your data out. Any case, drop your thoughts below about what privacy tools that you actually like, or have some faith in, and, maybe trust to some extent, and what you think about, who's actually running engineering over at Signal. I'd love to hear you guys' feedback on all this stuff. In any case, I know it's been a long one. Thank you guys for watching so much, and I will see you in the next video.